But I'm really grateful to Amanda and Ezra for bringing me in here to one of my favorite plant nurseries in the entire world. And by the entire world, I do mean Western North Carolina, because why would you want to go anywhere else? Off the mountain. It's weird. Anyway, my name's Adam Bigelow. I'm a plant nerd and a soil nerd and a compost nerd. I'm the garden manager of the Cullowhee Community Garden, which is a project of the Jackson County Department of Public Health over the mountain that way, about 20 miles, but it takes a little bit longer to drive there because the roads are windy. And I love that our garden is a part of the health department, because that makes our garden a garden for the public health. And I like saying that phrase a lot. And we garden using organic cultural methods out there. We don't charge people for their garden plots. We provide space. People adopt a plot. We give them tools and equipment, materials. And instead of charging money for that, we charge everybody half of their produce. And we're able to collect that food and donate it into local food relief. So it's a beautiful project. And I also work and help run the Silva Community Garden, which I've been a member of for 14 years now. And for most of that time at the Silva Community Garden, and for 6 years at the Cullowhee Community Garden, I've been in charge of making compost. And I love making compost. It's one of my favorite things. In fact, at both community gardens, we use a lot of volunteer labor, and often that volunteer labor is unskilled, untrained, doesn't have a background in gardening. And one of my chosen missions is to try to change that by letting people who don't have experience and skills and training do things that you maybe wish they did, so that they get that experience. So every job in the garden that we're working on, I'll allow people to do it. And I'll walk away and let them experience the joys and the sorrows of doing it right or incorrectly, knowing that with plants and gardening such, I can come back and help and fix things. And really it's nature that fixes things. Often it's the soil microbes, and we're going to talk a lot about the little critters and the microbes. There's one job in the garden that I don't allow anybody to do, and that's making compost. That's mine. And it's not because I think they would mess it up, because it's hard to mess it up, especially in a good operating system. And not because I would think that, it would be bad for them to do it or anything. The reason I don't allow my volunteers to work the compost piles is I would miss doing it if I wasn't doing it myself. It's one of my favorite things to do, and I know how that may sound to lay people, but I bet you y'all are okay with that. One of my favorite pastimes is that so-called horrible task of turning a compost pile. So we're going to talk about that, and I'm going to talk a lot about why that's my favorite thing, and some of the processes behind it, both the physical processes and the active making of a good, healthy, balanced, active, beneficial compost. And I'm going to talk about all the processes that go with it, but I'm also going to get into some of the philosophical things that go on in my head and my heart as I'm working that compost, because that is really what I seek out when I'm doing that work. Making compost happens all the time. See, my shirt says it. Compost happens, whether we want it to or not. And I don't know about y'all, but I'm very thankful for that composting and cycling of nutrients that goes on in nature all the time, because if it wasn't for that, we would be swimming in dead leaves and dead animal bodies and dead plants and wildflowers, stalks, and everything. They would never break down. But luckily for us, these things always are breaking down and always being broken down by natural systems and cycles. So it's just going to happen whether we want it to or not. Talk is done. See y'all next time. So you can just take your kitchen scraps and toss them out the window of your kitchen, and then they're going to break down. Or you can take them and put them into a plastic bag, and then take that plastic bag and put it into another plastic bag and put it into a plastic bin and haul it off with a truck with a lot of plastic parts to a landfill that's lined with plastic underneath to sit in an anaerobic condition, which means without oxygen, for 100 some odd years, where it breaks down very slowly and very poorly, releasing methane gases into the atmosphere and leaching out toxic stuff into the waterways, which is how most of our food waste is treated in our culture and our system. And it's not a good idea to do that at any scale, both at our homes, in our kitchens, in our facilities, our restaurants, schools, all of it. It's very wasteful. Here on this East Coast, we have we think about our trash and our waste really poorly, and so we want to just make it go away. It's the foul-smelling, nasty stuff. I went years ago and visited my sister in Seattle, Washington, and was really impressed by what they had going on there. For they had 3 different containers for your household waste. They had a really big wheeled rolling dumpster for recyclables. They had a standard kitchen-sized trash bag for what they termed wet garbage. Wet garbage is your kitchen scraps, your food waste. And then they had this little box for trash. And that is really representative of what you could do if we took our waste streams from our house and actually worked it and processed it so that we send everything back to systems and cycle it back into that productive system. Most of our trash, most of our household trash volume is recyclable materials. So that's why that big container is the biggest one in that Seattle system. Most of the weight of our waste, our trash, is compostable stuff. It's wet garbage. It's our kitchen scraps and dead houseplants, if you're like me and can't keep a houseplant alive. They'll help you keep houseplants alive if you want to learn to do that really well. And so if you're actively and conscientiously recycling everything that possibly, and not wish cycling, not going, oh, this little plastic film looks like plastic, I'm going to throw it into the plastic recycling, because that's not actually helpful. That's negative to the bigger scale of stuff. But if you're actively recycling everything that can be taken, and you're actively taking off your kitchen scraps and your wet garbage, what you're left with in trash is very small. So when it comes to composting our kitchen scraps and our household waste, at the very least, if you are trying to make compost, whether you're successful or not, you're diverting that weight from the landfill. And you're keeping all that weight from your house out of the trucks and that get taken to another place and loaded on another truck and taken to another place, often loaded onto a barge and shipped somewhere else. And that every step of the way, you're taking that weight out of the fossil fuel system and all the fossil fuels that it takes to haul that stuff away. So good job. If you are trying to compost, whether you're successful or not, you're keeping that out of your trash, and that is a benefit. So you can pat yourself on the back for doing that, and you can encourage others to do that too, whether or not you're getting an active, beneficial, finished product compost for your garden. But if you want to have something more than just making your heavy, stinking kitchen garbage go away, but you want to have something as a finished product and something that's going to help you grow really healthy vegetables and help you grow really healthy native plants and native wildflowers that are helping be a part of this ecosystem and helping do this amazing work that I charge you all to try to do in every step and everything you do in your life, which is called saving the world, because we need your help in doing that, making compost that has a use, and not just making trash go away, but actually getting something wonderful out of it, is some of that most important saving the world work we can do, because it puts things back into the system that produced it. Everything in nature, including us human beings, we are part of nature. We came out of those natural systems of building things up from broken down stuff and rebuilding it into forms and cycling it through a food web and cycling it through these wonderful systems that happen and have been happening longer than there have been people here. It's only in the last 100 years or so that we have started to become really out of balance with returning our waste and our trash to natural systems that produced it. Anyone get tired of seeing litter on the side of the roads? I get really tired of it, and we go out and pick it up, and then like the next couple days there's more litter on the ground, and we go out and pick it up. And you know, and a lot of it's food wrapping, like packaged stuff from chip bags or soda drinks or whatever it is. Other beverages in cans, usually not of good quality, so it goes. And so we picked that up, and sometimes as we're picking it up, I used to be cursing the person who threw that onto the ground. How dare they litter this beautiful place? I got a lesson in that one day. So I was walking through the woods and along a trail, as I'm wont to do every once in a while, as much as possible. And I was walking by myself, me and my dog, and I saw a hole in a tree about 8 or 10 feet up in the tree. And then at the base of that tree, I saw a pile of nutshells. No big deal. I didn't even break my stride. My brain instantly recognized squirrel's nest. I got about 3 steps past that recognition, and I stopped, and I turned, and I pointed, and I said to that pile of nutshells and to my dog, and it was just me and her and nature, and I turned and pointed, and I said, "Squirrels litter." Squirrels litter. And then it hit me. I imagined a bird lighting onto a sunflower, pulling a sunflower seed out, like taking a Twinkie off the shelf at the convenience store, and opening the wrapper. What do they do with the wrapper? Do they take it to the bin? Do they take it to a recycling station? No. They open that seed. Wendell Berry, one of our great farmer poets from Kentucky, said, "There is no waste, there is only wastefulness." And ours is an economy of wastefulness. Our economy is based on production consumption in a straight line with no cycling back to production. It's just use it, throw it away to that magical land of away, and then go get new and use it again. Many of us like to travel and go visit foreign lands and maybe other parts of the world and weird exotic places like, you know, Georgia or something, or other places. Has anybody, when they're planning their vacation or taking their vacation, visited the magical land of away, where we throw all of our stuff? No? Maybe. In the streets, we've been to a landfill. So I used to say that there is no such place as away. We don't throw our stuff away, but everybody kept talking about this magical place, so I kept looking for it. Pull out my atlas, spin a little glow, do a Google search, you know, looking for that how can I book a trip to away? And I kept looking for it. And eventually, in looking for this magical place where we throw all of our stuff, I found it. I found the land of away where we throw our stuff. It is next to poor people. All the time. Every time. The poorest of the poor in the world get our stuff. Some people in second and third world countries of Latin America and Southeast Asia live in landfills that buy our stuff, and their job is to pick through the trash and the waste to find maybe some usable stuff that can be sold into a market, and they can buy some food to take back to their ramshackle hovel house that they built out of the excess of our lifestyle based on convenience and ease, and a linear system where we just buy, use, and throw it away. And so there are things that we can do to take ourselves out of that system and try to help us back into the same system that produced us and will continue to produce us and everything else out there. And that's the ecosystem that we live in. And making compost is one of the best ways to get intimate with that system of waste and a stream that does not take litter to the stream and to the ocean, but takes it into your vegetables and takes it into your flowers and brings it back into your gut. And that's making compost. And I encourage you to do it and to learn and to start practicing and try it, because it is of that high order, save the world kind of stuff. And we need as much of that as possible. So again, you can just throw your kitchen scraps into the woods and you've done better by orders of magnitude than if you had thrown it into a plastic bag and taken it off to the landfill. But we want more than that. We want to make good compost that is usable. So I've brought some materials. I've brought some different systems that I use. I'm going to talk in detail about how I create compost outside. I'm going to talk very shortly about certain other systems that are very convenient and easy to find, namely compost tumblers. I'm going to go into detail about all the benefits of compost tumblers, and it's going to take me about a half a second. But we're going to talk about other great ways of making compost, including using worms, or there's some really neat ways of using insects like black soldier flies to create compost, which is how some of the larger scale places are starting to do it. And we're going to talk about what compost is and what compost isn't. And I want to start right there. So all the time I get people calling me up, like at local restaurants or somebody at their house, or say a really nice coffee place that provides a supportive, beneficial environment to college students as they're struggling to make their way through this system of university. And they say, hey, I've got this compost for you. We've been collecting this compost and we want to give it. And I'm going to tell you right now, this came from my house and it's nasty. Nobody wants that. Look at all them flies. Look at all them fruit flies. Sorry. Nasty stuff. That's food waste, y'all. That is not compost. These are kitchen scraps. If you take that outside, we're going to deal with it here in a minute. If you take that outside and throw it on the ground, it's going to stink. It does stink. If you don't believe me, you can stick your nose in there and breathe it in, and it smells nasty. But you can take that and dump it outside, and then critters are going to come, ravage through it. You can take it and pile it up and put some sticks on it, and you're going to have a refuse pile. You don't have a compost system. Eventually those food scraps will break down. You don't need to add anything to it. It's rotting. It's happening right now in your refrigerator, in the back, with that stuff you forgot. It's molds start growing on it. These are all the decomposers. These are the things that take a composition like an apple and decompose it into its constituent parts, so those parts can be reused in an endless cycle. You attract critters. Dogs are going to come into your yard, into your refuse pile, if that's all you're doing, or if you're not working an active compost system. You can make all kinds of different things out of compost, out of kitchen scraps. This right here is kitchen scraps and dried dead plant material that is not compost. It still stinks, doesn't it? Oh yeah, it smells good. It still stinks. It's still bad. It's not done. You've got big chunks of stuff. There's sticks. You could probably even, if you're a plant nerd such as me, might be able to identify what type of plant that is. That's not compost. This is part of the process. I took this from the Cullowhee Community Garden yesterday from the second pile. We're going to talk about this. I do a 3-phase compost system. It's my favorite way to do outdoor composting. This, however, hey Andy, come here. You want to smell that? This, my friends, is compost. This is finished product, almost. We're going to talk about why I just said almost. This is good stuff right here. This is rich. It's crumbly. It's also able to be formed into a ball. It's got critters like that earthworm in it that thinks I'm about to eat it. No. You can form it into a ball, just like you would be able to a heavy clay soil. Clay soils are really good at doing certain things. They hold nutrients, they hold moisture and water really well. Heavy clay soils do that too well, and so that's why we have to amend that with organic matter to help it be able to drain a little bit more. It's also super crumbly and big chunky particles so that it can just flow right out of your hands like a sand would or sandy soil. Sandy soils are great soils for drainage, for moving nutrients through that are in too heavy, out of balance. But they can do that too much, and then you're not able to hold any nutrients, and there's none of that good stuff, and the water drains through and it dries out too quick, and so plants struggle in sandy soils too. But the best, most ideal soil is a nice balance of clays, sand, and what we call loam, otherwise known as a good, rich, organic matter soil. Compost, finished compost like this, mimics those great qualities of all the different kinds of soil, and they help balance all the different soils. Compost, for the record, is not soil. This is not dirt. This is organic matter. But what's going on with it is it has a lot of the best properties of some of the best soils, and it is it's a precursor to soil, one of the precursors of soil, when combined with mineral nutrients that are from rocks broken down, and then some of the excretions of tiny little animals and critters that help bind it all together. So, when I was in horticulture school, one of the first lessons I learned was about dirt. Dirt is what's under my fingernails, or on my pants, or behind my ears if I don't wash too well. What's on the ground, what plants grow in, what we grow our gardens in, what's in the woods and the forest, is not dirt, it is soil. And soil is a living, breathing organism that, when combined with sunlight and water, provides everything that we know of as life on Earth. And it's a sacred and magical thing that is supposed to be in the ground and not washing away through our rivers and streams when a rain comes. When you see our beautiful rivers looking muddy like a chocolatey yoo-hoo drink, that's not good. That's actually our soil, our topsoil, and our lifeblood washing away into that waste and wastefulness of our society and culture. Another thing I learned in horticulture school when I was there, proudly at Haywood Community College, is in almost every class that I took, except maybe landscape design. If I did not know the answer to one of the test questions, I could put add organic matter and probably get partial credit. Because it is a go-to for every landscape, horticultural, gardening problem or issue. Add organic matter. You got poor soil, it's too clayey. That's a real word, clayey. How do you fix clayey soil? Add organic matter, compost, mulch. You've got sandy soil on the coast and it's draining out too quick. How do you fix sandy soil? I'll tell you how you don't do it. Don't add clay to sand. That's called cement. Don't add sand to clay. That's also called cement. Fix it by adding organic matter. Adding organic matter balances pH in the soil. Adding organic matter feeds the soil microbes that are actually doing all this work that we call life and growth. Adding organic matter helps plants resist disease. Adding organic matter to the soil helps plants resist insects and damage from insect pressures. Adding organic matter to the soil is one of our sacred duties, and it's how we're supposed to, as living organisms on this planet, pay for our food that we eat. Everything in nature eats, and everything in nature produces waste. And I see that as an economy that, well, how we pay for our food is by giving our waste back for something else to eat it. That's how we're supposed to pay for our dinner, is by pooping and peeing, so that other things come out and eat that. And that's kind of the magic of one of these cycles. There's no waste. Everything downstream eats what upstream produced. And eventually you get what we used to say was a food chain, like it was a link, and they're at the top of the food chain were the predators. But we've realized ecologically that it's actually more of a web and cycles, because what eats the top of the food chain predators? The bottom of the food chain microbes. When they die, they get broken down and consumed, just like the eagle consumed your chicken. You know, it's all in this great cycle and balance. And so we can work with those cycles and balances to create wonderful, beautiful food for our plants. And I just put up really exaggerated air quotes, because plants don't eat food. You know what plants eat? Sunlight. Plants eat sunlight. And it's a magical system that produces this. I'm going to come back to that. So I've been playing with this little baseball of compost. You want to catch it? I mean, I'm just kidding. Is that her tongue? Okay, it's another. Okay, good. So right now, I am actively and currently holding in my hand tens of billions, with a B, of individual microorganisms comprising thousands of different species of bacteria, fungi, protozoans, microarthropods, microencephalopods, tardigrades, which are those really cool things we call water bears. And if you haven't seen what a water bear looks like, it's the cutest little microbe you might ever find in your life. And they're in here, and there's tens of billions, with a B, of individual microbes, more individual than each of you, because we are also ecosystems made up of a whole bunch of different microbes and species, from the bacteria that live in our gut that help us digest stuff to the mites that live in our eyebrows. Even yours. Sorry. Be grateful for them. If they weren't in there eating all that dead skin that's slopping off, you wouldn't be able to see. So thank the little mites that live in our eyebrows, and move on. It's okay. You are an ecosystem. But I just said a big number, right? Tens of billions, right? Does anybody know how much a billion is with a B? It's Class time, everyone. Pop quiz.
1,000 million?
1,000 million, sure. One answer I usually get right off the bat that I consider the most correct answer is a lot. A billion is a lot. You were thinking that. I encourage you to shout out what you think. Maybe not that. I'm just kidding. So a billion is a lot, right? I'd say that's the most correct answer because we can't imagine a billion anything. Science tells us, psychology tells us that we can only imagine in our minds somewhere between 400 and 800 individual items. The smartest among us in that ability to have spatial awareness can imagine upwards of 1,200 individual things. So you can picture 100 bottles of beer on the wall. In fact, you just did, because psychology tells me that how that works too. It's a little trick I just played. 100 bottles of beer on the wall, no problem. 1,000 bottles of beer, maybe. 10,000, no way. It becomes an abstraction above those 400, 700 things, to where 10,000, 100,000, a million, a billion, and trillion are all the same number in our heads. A lot, because it's an abstraction. And in the English language, it's easy to go from million, billion to trillion. You just shift a couple letters. So we can say that really easily. I'm not really good with math or numbers. I don't really like them so much. So I like story and picture. So I went searching for how much is a billion, because 1 times 10 to the 9 was doing nothing for me. What I found was, if you were to start counting right now, one number per second, and you counted to a billion, 1, 2, 3, it would take you 31.7 years to count to a billion with a B in seconds. That's a lot. Actually, it would take you a lot longer to count to a billion with a B, because one, you have to sleep sometimes, so you wouldn't be counting when you slept. And some numbers take longer than a second to say, like 998,992. 900. So if you programmed a computer or you used your calculator to figure out how long it would take you to count to 1 second per number, it takes 31.7 years. Now, that's a long time. Anybody know how many seconds, how long it would take to count to a trillion with a T? Remember, we went from billion to trillion, we just changed 2 letters. How long would it take you to count to a trillion with a T?
1,000 times longer, I guess.
1,000 times 31.7, which means 31,700 years. The difference between a billion seconds with a B and a trillion seconds is from 31.7 years to 31,700 years. If you don't believe me, do the maths. I said that for you because we don't say maths plural in English in America, but in proper English from England, that's how it's said. Anyway, do the maths. Figure it out. It's big numbers. We talk about billion-dollar deficits and trillion-dollar bank bailouts in 2008. $7.2 trillion. I'm still mad about that, by the way. I don't know if anybody else is, but it still bothers me. The banks have all the money. Why do we have to give them money? Not only that, but how much is $7.2 trillion? Right, see? It's like earth-shattering stuff. Why am I talking about all these big numbers and government bank bailouts and stuff? Because I want to remind y'all that right now in this random sampling of compost, I am holding tens of billions with a B of individual microbes, comprising thousands of different species. Many of those critters in here have not even been identified by scientists. We could take this random ball of compost to the microbiology lab at Western Carolina University, just over the mountain there, And take it to Dr. Sean O'Connell, who would look under the microscope and maybe discover a brand new species to science. And we could give it a name like Bacteria winding starensis or something like that. And we would be published in the record for discovering new things. And this is one little ball, baseball-sized clump of compost from my compost pile, and not even telling how many critters and species there are out in the soil or in the forest stuff where it comes from. This is gold. This is the magic right here. This stuff is how we are able to have our fancy cell phones and go see Avengers movies that take 3 hours and some odd change, and boy, don't get a big soda because you're going to have to get up and use the bathroom and have your waste carried off through a piping system using electricity to this place where they collect it and dump it with chemicals and waste clean drinking water to carry it. Tens of billions of microbes right here in my hand doing all the magic work that is called growing plants. Oh, but it tastes so good.
Away from my wires.
Way from the wires. So, this is finished compost, and at some point today we're going to pass this around, and you will all get a chance to get your nose in there and smell it, and we'll talk about why that is in a minute. But I want to do a little bit of talking about some very serious and science-y type stuff. It's going to start real basic in like elementary school level stuff, and then really quickly work up to stuff that I just learned a few years ago that blew my mind a little bit. And so it goes like this. It's a story about energy. The sun shines down from the sky and hits plant leaves. Plant leaves capture that sunlight and eat it, kind of, not really, in a process called photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is where plants are able to take sunlight and convert it through a chemical process into sugar and carbohydrates. These sugars and carbohydrates go into the plant systems, into the leaves and stems and flowers and fruits above the ground, and into the roots below the ground to become everything we know that is the plant. All parts of it are created from that. It's also where every other animal and critter on the planet gets its energy from too. Plants eat sunlight, everything else eats plants, everything then eats those other things, and it's just big web of food going on. We're all just eating and pooping, and that's what's happening in the world at every level. So plants take that sunlight, produce sugar and carbohydrates. Half to 70% of the energy that's produced in the leaf is moved from the plant's leaf down into the roots. We used to think that was where all that energy was then stored so the plant could use it later. But what science has learned is that of the 50 to 70% of the energy produced in the leaf that gets sent to the root, about half of that gets exuded out from the roots into the soil around it. The roots give out all that energy they just worked really hard to make, and they just exude it out. Not wasteful, but as part of a process, and they do it on purpose. They exude, those root exudates are filled with sugar or carbohydrates, or as Dr. Elaine Ingham likes to say, cakes and cookies, because that's what it is, right? So they're making birthday cake and some chocolate chip cookies through photosynthesis in little small parts and giving it out to the soil around the roots. And they do that to feed the microbes that are in the soil. The microbes are what help make everything available for the plant. So this system I've been gardening under the entire time I've been an organic gardener, which has been the entire time I've been a gardener for the most part. And so the idea is we don't feed the plants, we feed the soil that then feeds the plants. So that's nothing new. We've been gardening that way for, I don't know, 100,000 years or so. Farming and gardening under the idea of adding organic matter and this whole agricultural revolution stuff that happened a while back. So that's how I've been gardening. Feed the soil. Healthy soil makes healthy plants. A few years ago, 3 years ago now, I was at a half-day soil workshop with Dr. Elaine Ingham from the Soil Food Web organization, and she said these next ideas that completely shook up everything I understand and know about soil and plant growth. And I left out of there feeling like I had just joined a cult or maybe found Jesus in the soil or something. It was like this great revelation. Because what's going on? The plants aren't just giving out sugars and carbohydrates for free in this altruistic thing. But contained within those root exudates are chemical messages that the plant is communicating actively with the microbes in the soil and talking to them, and they're saying things in these root exudates like, hey y'all, I'm low on cobalt, boron, and calcium. Can you go get me some? Now, soil scientists have learned, and we understand, that every soil in the entire world, all the different soil types, every soil contains in the mineral makeup of the soil, every component, micronutrient, and most macronutrients that a plant needs to grow. They are just in a mineral form, and so it's bound up and plants can't have it. So your plant could die from lack of phosphorus or potassium, and it kills it, even though the soil right next to the root contains all that it needs, because it's in a mineral form and it's bound up, and the plant's roots can't soak it up. But what can get that stuff out of the mineral part, and what they do really well in doing so, are bacteria and mycorrhizae, which are microscopic fungal parts. That's a technical term, fungal parts. And they are really good at going into the broken down rock mineral portion of soil and pulling out those micronutrients and those mineral components. And when the plant gives that reward to the fungi or the bacteria and sends that message and says, hey, I need cobalt, boron, and calcium in this combination, the fungi and the bacteria say, okay, cool, I got you. And they go and eat that and consume those parts and extract those nutrients in that ratio into their bodies, and then begin pooping and peeing that out. Or another critter that's bigger comes along and eats those bacteria or fungi, like a nematode or a microarthropod, and eats that and eats a bunch of them, aggregating all those microbial parts of bacteria and fungi that have those nutrients the plant asks for. And then those larger critters start pooping and peeing out, and those larger critters get eaten by even bigger critters, and it starts cycling. And this is all happening right under the soil in what's called the rhizosphere around the plant. This is happening right around the roots. And when those microbes take that mineral component of the soil into their bodies and then get eaten or excrete it, they have taken a mineral form of those nutrients and turned it into a soluble form in water that is then suddenly available for the plants in the exact ratio and combinations that the plant asks for at the start. Nobody's fertilizing the forest. Our forest systems are the most productive food producers and cyclers in the world, more so than maybe marine biologists might argue with me, but is anybody a marine biologist? No? We're good. Forests are the biggest producers of biomass in the world, and they are really good at it. Nobody's putting in 10-10-10 or triple super phosphate to make the mighty redwoods go. What makes the mighty redwoods grow are these little microbial bacteria. And so if you can have soil that is loaded with microbes, that is, pardon me, teeming with nutrients and microbes. T-E-E-M, he spelled it wrong. You will have plants that are provided everything they need to grow. And just like our bodies, if we're eating well and exercising and have good sunlight and are being hugged every once in a while and are loved, we're going to be healthier in our bodies, and our bodies will then be more likely to resist disease and illness. Plants that are living in and growing in a healthy, viable, vital soil are going to be stronger and healthier and more filled with nutrients, and are going to be able to withstand disease pressures, and are going to be able to withstand pests, because they're not going to be weak, they're going to be strong and be able to fight it off. And so we create this in nature by doing nothing. Everything that stuff needs to break down and return to its system is already contained on it or within it already. The seeds of our own destruction lie within us. I don't know if the Bible was saying that we can break down as compost, but that's how I read it. That's how I interpret it on a Sunday. So that is one of the main reasons that you want to not just make your kitchen scraps go away, but you want to work them through processes and systems so that they become the good stuff, the gold for a beautiful cycle of growth. So how do you do that? That's why we're really here, right? People want to know the how-tos. What are the steps I need to take to make my compost work really well? Well, I've got some ideas for you, and we're going to talk about that. And there are as many ways to create active living compost as there are people and systems on this planet. There are hot piles and cold piles. There is really quick compost and really slow compost. There's using worms and critters like this worm in my hand here, or black soldier fly larvae to break down food waste really efficiently. They are all different systems, but they are all basically working under the same microbial, bacterial breakdown and rebuilding of stuff that happens the world wide over, whether we want it to or not, and I'm very grateful we have it going. This is a worm right here, and this is a good little native worm that is really good at eating dead plant material. And inside the gut of the worm is bacteria that helps the worm break down and process dead plant material. And then the worms, like everything else in the world that's living and working like this, as we know it, are pooping it out. Worms are really great for making compost. If I see worms In my Colowee garden, active, supposed to be hot compost system, if I dig in there to turn it and I see worms, my compost is not working well and I am not having an active and successful compost in a hot pile outside. If I see worms in my finished product, that's great. But when I'm cooking compost, I want it to be working so efficiently with the microbes that the temperature inside the compost pile is too hot for worms to live in. And so if I see worms, I don't even need a thermometer to check the temperature. I know that it's not heated up enough and that I need to add something else into a recipe. So I'm going to talk to you first about the compost system that I first learned and built at both the community gardens that I work. And it's one of my favorite ways of making compost. And it's outside. It's in contact with the ground or with the soil. And it's exposed to the atmosphere, for better or worse. And that, I refer to it as a hot compost system and a 3-phase. And I build it out of pallets. And there's a lot of different ways you can build this. But what you want to do is you want to have a pile where you mix your ingredients and then piles that are cooking, actively breaking down, and then piles that are a little bit further along in the process, and then finished compost on the other side. And so what we do with that is very similar to what we're doing when we're baking bread. Baking bread and making compost are surprisingly similar processes. And they both have a lot of science going on explaining what's happening at every stage of the process. And you do not have to know any of that science to successfully bake a loaf of bread at your house, just like you don't have to know any of that science to successfully make a finished healthy compost. When making bread, you follow a recipe. You mix flour, yeast, water, salt, maybe some sugar sources or whatever, stir it up, let it rise for a bit, feed it back down, let it rise again, put it in the oven and cook it. And then bring it out, cool it, and then slice it, put butter on it, and eat it. Great breakfast. That's how you bake bread. Making compost is very similar. We mix ingredients together following a recipe. We then take that mixed, complete stuff and let it cook. And then we bring it out of that hot oven and let it cool and finish its process of cooking. And then we use it and consume it. We don't eat the compost. Maybe we even make compost tea, but you don't drink that either, even if you have enough lemon and sugar. But it goes into the plants and then back into the soil and the system. And it is following a recipe just like baking bread. So, what's the recipe? Here is your general basic rule for healthy, successful outdoor composting. For every handful of kitchen scraps, or container of kitchen scraps, or 5-gallon bucket of kitchen scraps that you bring to your compost pile, you need to combine it with 30 handfuls of dried brown plant material that is not fresh, but as dead can be, and dry and brown. And it's a 30-to-1 ratio, no matter if you're bringing a little container like this, or you're bringing out a big giant wheeled bin of it. For a standard hot active compost pile or a slow cooking cold compost pile, you want to think about it as a 30-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio. Carbon is your dried brown plant material. That's your weed pile, that you've let dry out and desiccate completely, that's old leaves, that's straw or hay if you want to go that route. Your local nursery that sells hay would love for you to buy hay to use for your compost system. But you don't have to buy hay to use in compost. You can make hay by pulling weeds and letting them die and dry out, and then using that in your system. By raking up leaves if you feel like you have to do that, and keeping a pile, and then pulling from that. And so you come up to your compost pile just like you would come up to your mixing bowl making bread. And in fact, I call the first bin of my system the mixing bowl. Eventually I discovered that it was easy to tell it as a story with mixing bowls and ovens. And in my compost system, the mixing bowl is always at the left. This is what we call stage left. It's my right, but it's y'all's left. So this is left. And it's always on the left, and there's no door on it because there's no door on a mixing bowl. It's open, so that one's open. Then the next two parts of the stage are the ovens, and they have doors on them. And if you want to get fancy, you get a long probe compost thermometer, which I apologize, I meant to bring that just so you could see what I'm talking about. Maybe they sell one here, I'm not sure. Bet you they can order you one if they don't. They are about 1.5 feet with a dial on it, just like you would for your checking the temperature of your meats or whatever you're cooking. But the probe is this long so that you can stick it into your compost, and it's the sensor sticks in the middle of it and reads the temperature. So my ovens in my compost system have doors and have temperature gauges just like an oven. And then when I pull out the finished compost, I set it and let it sit for a while. One last little turn at the end. And that's like the cooling rack for your cookies that you're baking or your breads that you're baking. Follow the recipe. 1 handful of kitchen scraps. 30 handfuls of dried brown plant material. So I come to my compost. I dump my bucket right on top. Maybe I had to use a pitchfork to make a little spot for it so it doesn't fall out and get on my feet, because that's kind of nasty, because kitchen scraps smell nasty. I dump it right on there, and then I take that pitchfork and I go to my weed pile. I go to my cut grass pile that you've allowed to dry out. If it's green, it's loaded with nitrogen. It counts as the 1. So adding green weeds or green grass into your active compost system like this is like adding more food scraps. That's not helping things. What you need is dried, dead plant material, as dry as your straw hat. Your straw hat will compost very well. I'm looking for it. And so you mix that, and then you also have to provide enough water. Just like when you're mixing up bread, sometimes you follow the recipe, but because it's a dry day, you need to add a little bit more water, or it's a moist, wet environment. So yes.
Up here it's hard to get dry leaves.
I was thinking the same
If I've
thing.
got a leaf pile that's getting rained on and it's wet, can I put that as part of the 30 in?
Yeah, you want moisture.
Okay.
We are, in drier environments, arid, high desert, you have to be really conscious of adding more water and watering your compost. If your compost is sitting out in full sun and it hasn't rained in a while, you're going to need to add that in. This year, you probably don't need to supplement water in any compost anywhere. There's plenty of water. Thank you, water. But yeah, wet. You don't have to protect any of this stuff and keep it dry. You just need to think about the idea of 30 times the volume. And then if it dries out, if it's not cooking, and we'll talk about some of that in a bit, then you can adjust by adding water, and that's going to help it. So you build up your compost pile over time, every day bringing your kitchen scraps, covering it with the dead brown carbon-rich plant material. When you do that, that's going to cover up the smell right away. So your compost isn't really going to stink all the time when it's being built. Once you get it up to a certain mass, and as I was taught, that's a minimum of 3 feet high and 3 feet wide, so 3 cubic feet of mass, you could walk away. You could build that pile up and then walk away and leave it and do nothing to it. And a year later, come back to that pile and you'll have rich, wonderful, usable finished product compost. That's called a cold pile. And it's static, meaning you're not actively mixing or turning it. So you have a cold pile. You can build that way. If you have land and space, you can have them so where you're using the compost from last year and all your kitchen scraps and yard waste are going towards making next year's compost. But if you want to get a finished product sooner, then you need to get more active. And that's where turning compost comes in. Many people dread the idea of turning a compost pile or don't understand what it means to turn it. We're going to talk in detail about that today. I love turning compost. It's one of my favorite physical activities. Anybody work out, join a gym, pay a gym membership? Does your gym give you tomatoes at the end of the day? Sugar snap peas? You're like,
I'm guessing it's easier than turning compost.
easier. No, I love turning compost as my workout. It's one of my favorite things. Therapy. Why do we turn compost? So you have a fully built pile, and at least once a week, what you want to do is mix this pile up. Because the decomposition and the breakdown is happening not on the outer edge of the pile, but inside the middle. And so when you turn a compost pile, what you're trying to do, one of the things you're trying to accomplish, is you're trying to take the inside of the pile and make that into the outside, and take the outside of the pile and turn that and make that live a little while in the inside. Breaking it up and then rebuilding it so that the inside becomes the outside and the outside becomes the inside. And this allows every bit of the active making compost to spend some time in the heat zone. The heat zone is where the bacteria and the fungi are breaking down the plant material, both the fresh, green, nitrogen-rich food scraps and the dried, brown, carbon-rich, dead plant material. And they're combining it and breaking that down. That's their food. They're having a party. They're doing work. They're working really hard. They're working harder than I am when I turn the compost pile. But when I turn that compost pile, I get a physical activity and a workout. And then one of the byproducts of me working physically is I sweat. I produce heat. The microbes also are doing heavy, hard work. And their byproduct of that work is also heat. And so the heat isn't what's breaking down your plant material and your kitchen scraps. It's where we can actually watch and measure the healthy activity of the microbes that are doing that work. Jesse, that's pretty close. Thunder, so I can't get in and measure and count the number of bacteria colonies and fungal colonies in my compost pile. But what we do is we measure temperature and heat as a byproduct of that work that they're doing to know if they're doing good work or not, and to know if my recipe is working or not. So in the compost oven, the heat is being produced by the bacteria and the fungi breaking stuff down. And so I measure that temperature with the Lawn Pro compost thermometer to know when they're active and working. And when they're not, then it's time to mix it. Because another thing that happens when you turn a compost pile, in addition to mixing things up and making sure everything stays in there, is you are able to provide to the bacteria and the microbes the thing they need the most of. Their limiting factor of growth is oxygen. Just like ours is. They need oxygen to be able to work. When we're doing active composting, we are working with aerobic bacteria. Aerobic bacteria consume oxygen to do their processes. Their byproduct is carbon dioxide. Good for plants. Really a great relationship, just like ours are. And so, what will happen is, inside this pile, the bacteria will consume the oxygen. And as they have plenty of oxygen to use, their populations will climb in a standard bell curve. And following that rise in population is a rise in temperature as their output. And so we watch that temperature rise, knowing that it's related with the rise in populations of microbes. But as soon as it plateaus at the top of that bell curve, we know that they have started to consume all the available oxygen in there, and then the temperature starts to fall as the populations of bacteria and microbes crashes and falls too. So it's at that point, ideally at the very top of the bell curve, but usually just after, when you notice the temperature spiked and then starts to go down, that you know the bacteria have run out of oxygen, so it's time to give them some more oxygen. Everybody feel safe? I don't. Oh, much closer. Maybe that's the universe saying, ha, this guy thinks he makes compost, when really it's nature and God making compost. Which is actually true. Well, it's true. I don't do the work. I just help it. So, the bacteria run out of oxygen. I then break this all up, make it fluffy, and then reform it. I'm glad we're not doing this talk in the kitchen, because I would be making a mess and get in trouble. And then reform it. And what I've done in that process is add more oxygen into the system. And what I could watch, if I were to be a real scientist, and not just the play scientist I like to pretend I am, I would measure the temperature of my compost pile every day and plot it on a graph and make a curve. And so what you would see is when you build that compost pile for the first time and stick the thermometer in there, it's cold. It's going to be at ambient temperature, whatever the outdoor temperature is, plus or minus. But as they start to work, that temperature is going to rise. And then when I turn it, it's going to crash completely back to outdoor ambient temperature as I destroyed their ecosystem and then rebuild it. Once they start rebuilding it, that temperature is going to rise again. And when it peaks and plateaus, that's when we turn it again. It usually takes about a week. Ideally, I would have my temperature probes hooked up to the internet, and I'll be able to track my temperatures, and I would get a text message notification telling me it's time to turn your compost. If anybody knows anybody in the engineering department at Western Carolina University, I would love a system like that. So let's make that happen. And so then I do that. Eventually, all of the good food for the microbes gets consumed, and the temperature doesn't rise much anymore. That's one of the ways that I know that the compost is getting to be finished. Because if there's available food for them and not just their byproduct of it, they will still consume it. But eventually you're going to turn your compost and you won't see the temperature rise as much or fall as much. And that's one of the keys indicators that your compost is finished. How hot are we talking? Successful, active, hot compost is going to see temperatures between 132 degrees and 162 degrees Fahrenheit. This is hot. Your compost is gonna steam. You've all seen the mulch pile steaming in the wintertime, right? That heat is being produced by the microbes on the inside. Your compost thermometer, when you pull it out, is going to be warm to the touch on an active hot compost. 132 to 162 degrees Fahrenheit are numbers that we actually use at the Jackson County Health Department and another department, and that's in the food safety area, because it's in those ranges that we are able to have food that is not going to have bacteria that is harmful to our bodies and kill us. So when you go to the Chinese buffet, you want to make sure that the Kung Pao chicken is at between 140 degrees Fahrenheit so that it's safe. If it's less than that, it's going to breed bacteria that can make you sick. If your compost isn't heating up to 132 to 162 degrees range, then you are not producing enough heat to kill off some of the diseases that can transfer over from old plant material to new plant material. But if you are hitting that temperature, you will reduce the likelihood of transferring plant pathogenic diseases. You will also be able to kill weed seeds at that temperature. A lot of weed seeds will die at 132 degrees and up. If your compost gets above 165 degrees Fahrenheit, something has gone very wrong. I know we live in the United States of America where we think more is better, but it's not always true. Hotter than 165 degrees, your aerobic bacteria die and thermophilic bacteria take over. And whereas the bacteria that's aerobic is byproduct is carbon dioxide, thermophilic bacteria's byproduct is sulfur dioxide. You don't want that. That's bad. Compost that has been aerobically produced is going to smell really good. If your compost stinks, that's an indicator something else is going on. Anaerobic bacteria, those bacteria that thrive without oxygen in wet environments or poor environments, anaerobic bacteria produce some of the worst smells in the world. Sewer gas is a byproduct of anaerobic bacteria. Methane and farts are produced by anaerobic bacteria. Anaerobic bacteria produces all the most revulsive smells in the world. So if you have a stinky, nasty smelling compost pile, there's a good chance that your compost has too much water and it's gone anaerobic. The way to fix that as an indicator of how well our compost is going. So here's my process. I've dumped my kitchen scraps. I add 30 times the volume of that kitchen scraps and dried bran plant material. Once a week, I've mixed that pile up. Eventually, once I've got a big pile and I've run out of room in the mixing bowl, usually by that time, the end pile is finished. So I move that pile out. I move the middle pile to the end pile. I move the mixing bowl into the oven, and then I start a new pile in the mixing bowl. And that cycle repeats. This is the three-phase compost system. It takes me from finished pile that has met that minimum size of 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet. It takes it about 2 months, 2.5 months to go from that to finished product. And that's pretty good compared with a year. And plus you're doing it in a cycle, so once you get that first one going in the year, you then have more compost ready and always coming. Eventually, the outdoor temperatures at night get below a threshold where the bacteria that cook compost go to sleep. And if you're not able to get a big enough mass like that giant mulch pile has, your bacteria are going to go dormant, and then it's hard to continue cooking compost in the winter time for that reason. And then once in the spring, nighttime temperatures get above 42 degrees Fahrenheit. Your compost wakes back up and starts cooking again. So outside in my gardens, I still mix compost, but I don't trust it unless it's spent that good 2 months at temperature cooking. 132 to 160 degrees Fahrenheit, 62 degrees Fahrenheit.
Are we allowed to ask questions?
Yeah, please
Okay.
do.
If
Otherwise,
you-
it's
if you
just
don't-
me talking.
If you don't trust it, would you not put it into your main gardens?
Very good question. What I do with my last pile for the year that I don't think spent enough time, where it smells a little off, I run it back through the original mixing bowl system at the beginning of the year. So I've got that going right now. My last pile that didn't finish cooking, I used that to feed the first pile that I'm making for the year, so that it does have that chance. I don't trust it for disease. I don't trust it for weed seeds, and I want it to fully break down and get us a chance to spend all that time at the house.
And you count that as part of your 30 parts?
Yeah, and it's that 30 to 1 is a real rough guide. The truth is, all plant material has its own carbon to nitrogen ratio. So you would really, if you wanted to be scientific and not just, if you're one of those that follows the recipe to the letter and doesn't just do a little handful of this and a little bit of that and refine it, then you would want to know the carbon to nitrogen ratio of all the plant material you're putting in. Different trees have different carbon to nitrogen ratios. But I would use that compost similar to, I would count that as the dry dead plant material and put that in as that mixture and not think about it as fresh. Yep.
Leaf piles, mulch piles, all that, does that turn anaerobic because nobody's really maintaining it?
So it can and it can't.
Okay.
Leaf piles, especially if they're whole leaves that haven't been shredded, can lay on top of each other like this. And when they do that whole, they hold moisture in there that then does not allow for aerobic breakdown. That can slow the breakdown, and so you could go to a leaf pile that hasn't been messed with, and a year later pull it out and you still see oak leaves. That's what happened in there. But if you're able to shred it a little bit beforehand, or you are able to do a process that I like to make called leaf mold, where you're having the fungal bodies go in and break down the leaves, then that's going to make it not able to pool water, and that's what's going to happen there. But you'll know if your stuff is anaerobic or not because of smell. So we're going to take a moment to smell this compost, because smell is one of my key indicators, along with temperature, of where a compost is in its processing system. When it's kitchen scraps, we don't need to smell the kitchen scraps yet. We're going to use that later for something else. But you know what kitchen scraps, your bucket, your compost bucket that's been sitting on the counter with the fruit flies around it. Yes, please.
One year, I didn't know what I was doing. I did a garbage can just full of kitchen scraps. Let it sit, and it was that horrible soupy stuff. Okay.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I did take scoops of it and pour it around my plants. Of course, my neighbors did not like me for quite a few days,
Right.
but the smell did go away.
It went-
But
goes
what I
away.
noticed later in the season was that I had the biggest, fattest worms I've ever seen.
Yeah.
So is that okay?
I mean, that's okay. Yeah,
I mean-
sure.
Okay.
You can take your kitchen scraps straight out of your kitchen, dig a little trench,
Yeah.
and put it in the soil. They're going to come in and get it. Ultimately, there is a great, wonderful balancing force in the universe. I'm thankful for it. And it brings everything back into balance. So while it might cause some initial short-term damage doing that, eventually the fungi, the bacteria, the worms are going to come in and balance it all out, and it's going to be great. Yes, sir.
You mentioned leaf mold earlier.
Yeah.
opposite end of the spectrum, what if you just had a huge pile of shredded leaves with no green and didn't do anything to it?
So you can, I like to do that. I'd make a wire bin out of fencing and load it with leaves and let it break down for about 6 or 8 months. Usually from the fall, it's full, and then in spring when I need to want to have some organic matter to add into my garden, it's broken down 3/4. That is the process of making leaf mold.
How is that different from compost?
So it is similar, but it's different in that it's not processing your kitchen scraps. It's processing your yard waste and your leaves.
Is that more like worm castings then? Like that?
Well, it's not, but it's similar. I mean, eventually, there's all the different things, ways of making compost are all basically running the same thing. Taking complex, organized systems and breaking them down into simple systems.
So the 30-to-1 nitrogen, that's just to speed it up?
And the turning is to speed up the process. The taking of leaves, and instead of just having them in a pile, but building them up into a pile that has air on 3 sides of it, speeds up the process as well. It's feeding and creating those conditions that provide the optimal conditions for the materials to grow. In compost, we're mostly working with a blend of bacteria and fungi in somewhat equal ratios. In making leaf mold, it's all fungal, and the fungal hyphae breaks stuff down.
Is the end product similar though?
Similar but different. The end product of leaf mold isn't going to have as much macronutrient availability as the end product of compost. It's all going to be good. Ultimately, you're feeding organic matter to the microbes, so eventually it's all going to be good.
So if you're collecting, shredding huge amounts of leaves, you're better off mixing that with some kitchen scraps and making a hot pile?
I do both. I use the leaves in my compost along with weeds, and I make leaf mold static piles that I then come back. They serve different purposes in what I'm doing in a garden.
So when you're starting out, I usually take my kitchen scraps every other day down and throw them in on top of my existing pile in one of those nice big brown plastic things with holes in it.
Yes.
When would I know it was ready to move to the next, since I'm continually putting new stuff into it? As in, okay, move that over?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. And for those that didn't hear, when do you know that the mixing bowl part of your compost system is ready to put into the oven? It's when it hits that volume. When you have enough of a piles to where it's a minimum of 3 feet. More is better in this situation. Minimum of 3 feet high, 3 feet wide. Then you can, if you keep adding to that, you're never going to get to use it. And so you want to then start a new pile so that then that full pile can go in and break down. So I use size and volume as a key to when it's ready to move
So
over.
it doesn't matter if some of the newer stuff hasn't broken down at all?
Right. As long as you're going to keep processing after it, and this is only in one system, a hot active compost, where you're turning it at least weekly.
Right.
Do your bins need to be in full sun?
That's a really great question. Where I built the compost pile at the Cullowhee Garden has taught me a lesson. And it's actually better to have it out of full sun, or to have it facing to where it's open to the north and not open to the south. What I'm dealing with at Cullowhee Garden is my bins are open to the south, and that sun is drying them out. And so then they're lacking the moisture necessary to really heat up. So I have to supplement water. I don't really want to water my compost. I want it to be fine. So I'm eventually either going to have to move it and change its facing, or I'm going to have to build a little shed over it. And if you can control the moisture so there's enough but not too much, that's going to be better. So in rainy years, there's going to be too much water and it's going to go anaerobic and smell nasty. And dry years, it's going to be not enough water, and it won't break down, and stuff's going to smell nasty. But when you have compost, like, and again, for the record, this bucket does not contain compost. This contains kitchen scraps. And somebody's like, "Oh, I collect compost in my kitchen." No, you don't. You collect kitchen scraps, food waste in your kitchen. This is compost. And so I invite y'all to come up, and it's the hands-on portion if you want to. I will admit that I sifted this through a strainer, but what I would like to invite y'all to do is come get a handful, or you can use my hands if you want to, and smell of it, and see what it smells like. And I'm not going to force this on you. This is an invitation, but the time to do it would be now. Yeah, you can help yourself. Smells good.
Get in there, Liz.
We can play the smells like game. Smells like dirt. Soil, thank you. Thank you. All right.
Oh yeah.
So when this is cooked, and you take it out and put the other stuff into this,
Yeah.
you just put it in your garden space then? You
Yeah.
store it somewhere?
I store it in a pile. I use it. I sprinkle it on top. I put it into planting holes when I'm planting transplants. When I dig out potatoes, I add compost in and reform the beds. I add it on top, and then rarely, if I disturb into the soil, I try to add it in there to help rebuild the soil structure from that
Do you
system.
need to like protect that, cover it, or anything?
You
like
can,
that?
but I don't.
What do you use leaf mold for? You said they have different uses.
Yeah, I use it as a top dressing mulch.
Okay.
I also am starting to use it more and more as a replacement for potting mix.
Leaf mold.
Leaf mold and compost mixed together, and I'm trying to figure out, because most potting mixes are made from peat moss. Peat moss is a mined, non-renewable resource, and the peat bog mining in Canada and Northern Europe and Northern Asia is a really heavily extractive process that causes a lot of ecological damage, and we have to move away from that.
You feel the same way about coconut
I
oil?
love coconut core. I would turn the camera and shine it right there on Fox Farm Products, Coco Loco. Bush Doctors, Coco Loco, potting mix. Brought to you by Winding Stair Farm and their favorite potting mix, and it's the only one I want to use for any application I'm doing. It is a mixture of what we call in the industry pine bark fines, which is aged forest products, coconut coir, which is the byproduct of growing and processing coconuts. It also contains kelp meal, fossilized bat guano, earthworm castings, crushed seashells, and then it also contains about 15 different species of microbial life. That stuff grows plants like nobody's business. I love it, and it's good stuff. I can't recommend it enough. I don't work for Fox Farm, nor do I get any residuals yet, but I'm happy to sponsor Fox Farm. If you would like to contact me at bigelowNC@gmail.com, I would be your spokesperson because I love your products. Thank you. That's good stuff. I love the coconut. There's ways we have to move away from some of those fossil products, and peat bogs are basically a fossil fuel type thing. So, what did this smell like to y'all? I heard a couple things. Dirt. I saw some balls of this go flying through the room here. You guys okay? Anybody get hurt? All right. What did this smell like to you? I heard dirt. Smells good, right? Sweet a little bit. Natural. I like to say that this smells like the forest right after a rain, because that's exactly what it is. I will let y'all know that that smell, both of finished good compost and the forest after a rain, is basically bacteria farts. Smells good. In my trained nose, this is actually a little sour. And so this pile that I took this from is not finished and needs about another week or so of cooking to where I would call it finished active compost. But for educational purposes, I'm faking it with y'all today. But I use that smell as an indicator. So if it is rich and sweet and there's no tang, there's no sourness, there's no slight hint of ammonia, and it's just sweet and rich and good, it smells just like the forest after a rainstorm. And I can't identify any of the plants that were made that were in it. I don't see an oak leaf. I don't see I can't get a leaf scar on a twig and say that's a maple tree. Then I know it's broken down and it's finished and it's good compost. Even if it's almost finished, it'll finish composting and breaking down, because remember, we're just mimicking natural processes that occur already, and we're providing optimal conditions so that it speeds that process up. This stuff right here, if you're brave, is not finished, and it smells more tangy and more like a little.
This is the smell I like.
That's the smell you
I
like.
like
It's
that.
tangy.
I like
It's
that.
got a little bit of ammonia smell to it. That is not, and it's got big chunks of sticks, and there's some things I could probably identify, and it's not sweet. That's not finished compost. That's an indicator that the compost is still trying to work, and there's still things in there consuming it. If you are bacterially rich with compost, with the microbes that are doing it, you won't smell it until you turn it, because all the odor causing compounds are being consumed, eaten by the bacteria. So a good, working, active, well-balanced, mixed well compost pile will not smell unless you're actively forking it and stirring up compounds and stuff like that. Yes, ma'am?
I have a question. Is it a bad thing if you have lots of snails in your compost pile?
So if you have a finished compost, or you have a cold, static pile that you're not working, then having those soil critters like snails, worms is okay in finished compost and in a cold, static pile. But in my hot system, if it's hot, they won't be able to live there, which is why, and it's shocking to people. They're like, I'm cooking compost and it's filled with worms, and I'm like, it's not really what you're looking for at that stage. What you're looking for is
Good
that
in the beginning, though.
it's going to be okay in the beginning. In the beginning, once you hit a little bit of height, your mixing bowl compost is going to start heating up. You do not want, if you're seeing worms, you're not at temperature. If you're at temperature, you won't see worms. You won't see critters in there. You won't see the little pill bugs and the little roly-polies. You won't see any of those things when you're stirring it and cooking it up.
It looks like when it starts getting hot, the snails are trying to get out, just going up the side.
They get out of there. They don't want to cook. They run away, and that's what you want. And the worms run away. Once it's finished, then they come back in. Now, worm composting, which you're going to talk about a little bit, that's a whole different business. You're actually growing worms to consume your kitchen scraps, and that's a really neat thing. But this outdoor active, the way I mostly make compost, that takes 2.5 months, and weekly physical turnings. That's the worms, the sour smell, The big sticks and particles are all indicators to me that it is cooking but not finished. Finished compost will have critters. A hot compost will not.
I have one of those store-bought black bins that you can't make a hot compost out of that, can you? Okay.
So here's a great segue. Thank you. Let's talk about compost bins and compost tumblers as a product. Do y'all sell compost tumblers here? Oh, good. Compost bins and compost tumblers are horrible things. And people all the time throughout the history of me working in the community gardens have decided to come help us by bringing us their old compost bin and tumbler. Here, there, you can use this in the garden. And I'm like, I have no use for that whatsoever. They are useless. They have no benefit to you whatsoever. Do not spend your money on them. Do not buy these plastic contraptions that are built to break. That if you think it's easy to twist this thing and make it turn, you still have to do a 30-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio in a bin or a tumbler. You'll fill that up in one load, and you're not going to really get a good mixing of compost in that. You may end up with something that's broken down and maybe to the layperson looks like compost, but smell it and you'll know it's not. Plus, it's out of contact with the soil. And soil is sacred. Soil is a sacred thing. And in fact, here in the South and in Southern Appalachia, we don't say soil. How do we pronounce soil in the South? Soul. Right? Soul is a sacred thing. What do you call the bottom of your feet? Soul. What do you call, anyone know the Latin word for the sun? Soul. And what do we call that spirit and part within every living thing that never dies? Soul. So when I'm barefoot in my garden, with my soles touching the soul that's been warmed by the soul, it all feeds my soul. And in a compost bin, you have taken away that soul connection. And you can't grow soul food with that because it's out of contact with those natural systems. When you're making compost on the ground in touch with the soil microbes, those critters can come up and get in there. You don't need compost starters and you don't need inoculants. They can help, especially if your stuff's already out of balance. But remember, as the Bible says, the seeds of our destruction lie within us. Everything needed to break down everything on the planet is already around everything and just waiting for the conditions to say go. And then it starts to break everything down. It's a beautiful process, but we can speed it up. So, hot compost, 30-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio, turning it every day. And what I do is I take it out in phases and then build it back so that I try to take the inside of the pile and turn that into the outside of the pile. And take the outside of the pile and make that into the inside. I use my nose, I use a temperature gauge, and I monitor it, and I know that 2.5 months, 2 months later, I have finished product. And can keep that cycle going throughout the whole warm time to make active, hot compost. As opposed to cold compost. Did you have a question?
Yeah, when you start your compost pile, you're just doing it flat on the ground?
Flat on the ground.
Cardboard, anything?
I don't put any cardboard. I sometimes put larger sticks.
Okay.
Not wood sticks.
Okay.
But weed, herbaceous plant material pieces that are bigger on the bottom. But I don't worry about it too much. And so then I add the kitchen scraps and plant material and start building it that way. Once I have it up at a certain size, then it's taken enough time that usually the last pile is ready to come out. I move them down. I turn them once a week. 2.5 months later, finished product.
Are you having any covers over the hot or finished?
It's recommended at times. I haven't done that really well yet, but I want to, and I'm starting to play with ideas of a thick mill plastic or rubber over the top to try to keep compost like this working in the winter time. But I don't worry about it too much. You're going to have a little bit of nitrogen loss to evaporation. You're going to have a little bit of nutrient leaching through rainwater. But I think the benefits of having connection with that system is okay.
And you said you use pallets? So
I do.
Airflow through all?
Airflow through all sides. I use pallets. I make a box. I can mock it up. Here's our compost bin. I'll put a pallet there on that end, a pallet here, pallets along the back. I should have 3, but we're going to do 2-phase. And then these are fixed and fashioned into the ground with posts like this, so that when it comes time to move it, I can just pull this pallet out and move it, and then put this pallet back so where they're bins again. And then, oh, thank you, Neen. I have a pallet on the front to act as a door. So this is where the mixing bowl is, and these are the ovens, and then there's a third one over here, and in color we actually have 5 now.
What about on the bottom?
Nope. No. Right on the soil. Right on dirt.
And can you get 3 pallets around here?
I mean, yes. And you can also find places that want to charge you for pallets. I don't know, can you get free pallets around here? Sometimes hard to find, sometimes easy to find.
You can usually talk to the recycling center, the landfill. They show up at places. Yeah. A lot of the bigger manufacturers will have them. They just stack up. I see them all the time on the Craigslist, but always have.
Yeah.
Good question.
Leaving this topic for a second.
Great.
I live out by these strawberry fields that Wayne Moss has been putting in all over Macon County.
Okay.
They bromide the soil to kill everything.
Yeah.
They're fallow so much that every time it rains, I'm just watching their soil.
It's a horrible thing.
Leave.
Yeah.
And then the Roundup Ready's moving in too.
Yeah.
Soybeans and corn.
It's horrible.
Yeah, I hate seeing it.
Me too. All right.
When do you know is too much compost for your garden?
I don't. What? Never too much compost. I mean, it could be.
Constantly adding it.
I'm constantly adding it. When I apply finished compost to my garden on top as a top dressing or side dressing is the terminology, I like to add it in about a 1/4 to 3/4 inch layer. Too much, it's not going to be horrible, but it's not going to really be as beneficial as a little bit at a time like that. But there's usually not too much compost. Some people in the conventional agricultural world will talk about bacteria loading, but when you're trying to use methyl bromide to sterilize soil, how would you enjoy having your soul sterilized? Not a good idea. So too much compost isn't anything I worry about. I just checked the time, and I just talked one system for 2 hours. This is awesome. Yes.
This is kind of a beginner question.
Okay, good.
Anybody have a clever idea of what you can use to shred all this stuff with if you don't have a lawnmower?
I do. As far as leaves, we have a place up in Canada on 1,000 Islands, and so I'm not lugging mulch over for my garden. So I vacuum up the leaves with a bag that shreds them, and then I put that bag into a garbage can, and then I take a trimmer and
So, and that works. That's a great approach. I will say that what I heard in there is a fossil fuel run leaf blower vac. Okay, what's your electric source? Fossil fuel run leaf blower vac, and a fossil fuel run string trimmer, speeding up what can be also accomplished slower. What I recommend doing is using a rake to rake your leaves, and then the rake and the shovel to put them into a bin that will speed up the decomposition process. The shredding will happen by fungal bodies, and then you can use that later for your compost.
I have a push mower, but it's not easy to do that.
I recommend recycling your push mower, buying a scythe, and reconnecting with nature.
There's no motor on this
No,
mower.
this is the old-fashioned.
The real mower.
It's just push it and it goes around.
Keep it sharp
Yeah.
and mow 5 times a week for successful real mowing. There's a talk for a different program.
So when
On,
you leaf, you don't shred them.
Well, I don't. Thyme and fungi and breakdown shred them for me. Yeah. I don't. And I don't think it's really necessary if you can allow them the time to break down and process on their own and then run them through a compost system.
How about kitchen scraps? Do you shred those?
I don't shred those, but I do. If you want to shred them, you can. And there's a real easy way of doing it. You take your collected kitchen scraps, put them into a bag, and put it into the freezer. Freeze them, then pull them out, defrost them, and what happens is all the water in the cell walls froze and expand, bursting the cell walls, liquefying your kitchen scraps. And then you put that in, but you don't need to do that either. So that is outdoor hot compost turning, and we also talked about outdoor cold compost 1 year. Just build the pile using that 30-to-1 ratio and do it. There's a system I'm really excited about for municipal large-scale composting that I want to get going in our communities, including Jackson County, Macon County, and it's called static pile forced air. And if you Google static pile forced air composting, it's really neat. It was developed in eastern North Carolina in the animal agriculture industry, where there are more pigs in North Carolina than there are people, and most of them are in a few counties down east where the good barbecue lives. And they had to figure out a way to process cold animals, whole hogs. And so they have developed this system called static pile forced air, where they're combining whole animals and fresh wood chips and get a finished product compost in 2.5 weeks. And it's really awesome because we could do it. In Jackson County, we could set up a system to handle the kitchen scraps of the hospital and the schools and all the residents and run on wood chips and kitchen scraps, including meats and stuff like that, and have a finished product in 2.5 weeks. And what it does is when we turn compost and mix it, we're adding in oxygen. This static pile forced air has tubes under the pile with perforations and an air pump constantly pumping in oxygen so the bacteria never run out. They're always working, they're overworking, and it breaks the stuff down in 2.5 weeks, whereas my system takes 2.5 months. What's that? Soft bones, not beef bones, but hog and poultry bones. Bones and all are consumed. It's really amazing. Meats, cheeses. In standard home composting, it is recommended to not put meats, cheeses, brittle bones, and the reason for that isn't it's going to make you sick. The reason for that is those smells are going to be attracting critters that are going to come in and get your stuff. If you live in bear country, I got no help for you. Sorry.
We have a chicken, so what about egg shells?
Eggshells are great.
Too many eggshells?
No.
No.
Too many. The only thing that can be too many in your kitchen scraps.
That would count as kitchen scraps?
Yeah, I count it. It's calcium rich. It's really good stuff. Okay. And even if they're identifiable as eggshells, they're still going to be great in your garden. Put the eggs in there. Liquid fats. So vegetable oil will smother the bacteria. So don't add that. And make that go away some other way. And then if you're juicing, heavily juicing at home, and you have a bunch of citrus pulp and citrus rinds, large amounts, that citric acid will damage the bacteria and slow your process. It won't stop it completely. Now, a few rinds and stuff, that's going to be okay. A few orange peels just from eating, but if you're like 20 oranges a day and you're power juicing and going crazy with it, then store that somewhere else. Fine. Definitely don't throw it to the landfill, but make a different pile and allow it to break down over time, because it'll slow your process. Both of those things will slow your process. Yeah.
So I know you turn the when it's cooking.
Yes.
But when you're making the mixing bowl, do you just let it sit?
I usually let it sit. It might speed it up a little bit to turn it, but that's also where some of the nastier stuff is, smelling.
Yeah.
I usually just let it sit and then do the first turning when I move it.
Okay.
And the moving from one section to the next counts as a turning. So that counts as your turning of the pile. There's another system that I really love, created in Japan. And it's this. It's called Bokashi. Now, if you Google search Bokashi, B-O-K-A-S-H-I, you're going to see a lot of different translations of what it means. When I first read it, they told me that it means fermented vegetables, like kimchi means fermented vegetables. It's not really true. The word bokashi means that it spreads around in Japanese. But what this was developed from is a way to process kitchen scraps in a small indoor environment to where it's not nasty. And if you've ever been to Japan or looked at how people live, there's a lot of people living in close proximity in small spaces. So this was developed to be able to process kitchen scraps. And as you see here, this is a bin, a specialty bin. You don't need to buy this specialty bin from Terraganics.com. You don't have to buy their specialty bin, but if you do, it's a little bit easier and convenient. It has some parts that you need to think about if you're going to make your own, and you can make one out of buckets, and we'll talk about that. But it's got this drain. This is like a tea urn. It's sloped in the middle, and then it's got this drain. And then on the inside of this bucket, it has this little lid, this little strainer balancing thing that sits on a lip above. And this is a little weird spatula that is used to press things down. And this is how composting with Bokashi works. This is like a pre-composting storing thing, but it's amazing. And it ferments. It goes anaerobic. And that's what you want at the start of this. And with Bokashi, you can put in your cheeses, you can put in your meats, and you can put in your brittle bones. And it's amazing. And I didn't really believe it when I first got it. And so I was doing my vegetable scraps, but one day I went into the fridge and I saw a piece of steak wrapped in a bag. And I was like, ooh, I'm gonna have steak for dinner tonight. And I opened it up and I was like, oh, you know, it was still red, but wow, it had turned and it was foul smelling. So I was like, okay, Bokashi, let's see what you got. So I put it in the bin and then I sprinkled it. This is not Bokashi. In here is Bokashi. We're gonna pass this around and let y'all look at it. This is oat bran that's been inoculated with mycobacteria and mycofungal little critters, the soil microbes that do all the magic work. It's been inoculated with products, effective microorganisms. EM1 is what they use to produce this, but there's other ways you can produce it. And it's inoculated into the oat bran. The oat bran acts as a carrier for it. And then they're dried, and so the critters go dormant. But as soon as they come in contact with moisture, they come back alive. And when they come back awake, they start doing what everything does when it wakes up. They start eating. And one of the things they eat really well are any odor-causing compounds being released. So I put my steak, that big piece of cow flesh right in the middle, and then I sprinkled on bokashi like this. And then shut the lid and was like, all right, we're gonna see. The next day, I have my kitchen scraps from the that night's dinner and breakfast and all that. And so I go up to the bokashi bin and I'm wary. I'm like, I peel it back. No smell. I look, I can still see the steak. I stick my nose down in it. No smell. All I smell is bokashi. So let's pass this around.
Is that a hard product to find? That bokashi?
You can order it. And there's some places that are starting to produce it and make it locally. And then we're going to talk about some alternatives that I'd like to play with around here if anybody wants to play at making our own bokashi. We can call it Appalachian kashi or something. This stuff smells really good. And when you're working your system, it smells really good. You could use this dried stuff right here as a compost kickstarter inoculant if you want to. So the process of doing bokashi in this bucket system here is you start with an empty bucket, you put the base that has the holes and strainer in it, and then you pepper, you sprinkle in enough of this dried oat bran with the microbes in it. Just sprinkle that in until it coats the bottom, similar to that. Then you add in your nasty stuff.
This is more better for my age than this hot burning.
I will say that I encourage you to think about the one. This is kitchen scraps from my kitchen. This is some kale. This is some dried. I tried to dry. You ever tried to dry herbs in a rainforest? Okay. There's a banana peel. I'm going to tell y'all one thing about banana peels and orange peels and stuff like that. You know the little sticker?
Yeah.
That is plastic. When you put it into your compost, you are littering. Eggshells. All that stuff goes in there. Enough for a day's bit, right? So I put that in there. I pepper. Ta-da! And then I shut it. The next day, when I open it up, the first thing you want to do is take this little spatula that's actually a masher and mash things down to try to remove airspace so that the bacteria can go anaerobic. And then I pepper again and add more kitchen scraps. Nasty. Dude, what's that? I don't know. It's nasty stuff. Who would reach their hands in their kitchen scrap bucket? Me. That's it. I would do that in a heartbeat, right? I could use a spatula, but it's just not as much fun. So then there's my next day's stuff. more peppering, close the lid, walk away. Every day, that's what you do. Another component that you do every day, by the way, if you do reach your hands in the kitchen scrap pile, here's the best way to clean it. Take the bokashi, rub it on your hands. It's clean. Here's an irony. We say things that are fouled or soiled or dirty. You know what the best cleaning material in the world is? Soil. I can prove it. Take a dead, rotting, nasty animal, bury it, come back in a month or two, dig it out. You're gonna find the cleanest bones ever. So that's clean. So that happens every day, and then also every day, what you want to do is, and this is the design of this system, why it works so good, is you want to drain out the leachate. The leachate is that liquid that comes out of the bottom. Drain that out. Don't throw it away. That leachate is good stuff. If you're on septic, pour it down your drain. It's going to help keep your septic active. That's the same critters, microbes that are in those septic inoculants. You can collect it, mix it with water in a 9-part water, 1 part leachate to make a 10-to-1 mixture and use it as a plant food. You can, if you're really brave, don't drink it. Don't drink that. But if you're really brave, you can like take that stuff out, mix it with water, and shampoo with it. It's amazing. It's amazing stuff. Anyway, once you've got this full, you do not have finished compost at all. But what you have is a really easy to work with, fermented, non-bad smelling way to pre-processing your kitchen waste that you can then add into an outdoor pile, and it's going to kick it up. Or you can take that and bury it right into your garden and then plant in it in 2 weeks, and your plants are going to go crazy. It's good stuff.
So if you make it out of a bucket, what do you have to do?
Great, thank you. So if you're going to build your own compost system, all you need to do is have 2 5-gallon buckets. And they nest in each other, and when they nest, there's about this much space under one. So on the inner bucket, where you're going to be putting your kitchen scraps and your bokashi mixture, drill holes. Not big chunks, but little fine holes, a bunch of them. And then set it into that other bucket. And then every day when you pull it up, drain off that leachate before it fills up into there. So real easy, real DIY, easy system. There's some convenience in this. You can get a potato masher at a thrift store to take the place of this.
You do this indoors or outdoors?
Indoors. Right in my kitchen. You might need to communicate with your shared living space partner about that, and there's some tough sell.
Can you do that indoors, or is it recommended indoors?
I mean, you can keep that outside, sure. In the wintertime, things are going to slow down. What's that?
Would critters get into that, or maybe they won't smell?
Yeah, they love it. You like that?
Yeah, do you have to empty that out? Does that get emptied out on
Yeah, so you fill that up, and however long it takes you, depending on your volume of kitchen scraps, but it's just kitchen scraps and this powdered mixture, and that's it.
How you got to keep buying that, or once you get it started?
That's a great question, and that leads me to some of my next developments I'm hoping to work with, is how to create this. And instead of buying it in as a product.
Is it expensive?
Relatively no. But you can, what I've learned is, I bought it in a 5-gallon bucket, and I think maybe over time the efficacy of it reduced. But that's probably due to my storage capacity, and also I don't heat my house very well. maybe. So you can buy it less. You can buy the liquid product that they use to make that. It's called EM1, and it's microbes in water with molasses. And then you can put that into a Compost-Vid aerator and grow more microbes and then pour it out over something. I was reading just last night that somebody, instead of using oat bran, are inoculating layers of newspaper and then putting in the newspaper as their bokashi. I want to take spent brewer's grains, because when you're brewing beer, you got all these microbes going on, and then the waste is this mush that's loaded with, among other things, all these different species of lactobacillus. Can I dry that and then use it as a bokashi? That's a question I've been asking for a little while. And then one time on one of those late night Google search wormholes that we get on, where like you search this and it takes you over here, and next thing you know, I was at Master Cho's natural farming system, also known as Korean natural farming, developed in the 1960s by Master Cho. And they have a two-fold system of producing all of the fertilizers you need for your farm. One is called fermented plant juices. In the spring, you got fast-growing weeds. You're pulling them out of your garden. Take those weeds, put them into a bucket, fill it with water, put a lid on it, walk away for 3 weeks. Come back, it is fermented. It's green liquid. It smells nasty. Your plants will love it. Strain it out, store it, mix it 1 part fermented plant juice, 9 parts water. Water your plants with it. The best liquid fertilizer you've ever made. We might work on a product where I just weed my garden, and then we're selling Bigelow's Natural Farming fermented plant fertilizer for $12.95 a container, and all it is weeds and water.
Isn't that kind of what are you doing? That kind of like
A little bit.
that?
Yep, a little bit. Their other thing they do is they inoculate indigenous microbes. So the microbes that we buy as bokashi or EM1, or the microbes that are in this product or in that product, are all cultured and brought in from similar species, and they are short-lived in our environment. But in our environment, our soil, our forest stuff already, are microbes that are long-lived and breed and have locally adapted to the ecosystem you're growing in. And so if you can take a piece of rice cake and put it into a wire box or a wicker box, and I'm thinking like those little suet feeders and some rice cake, and bury that into the ground for a week and then dig it out, it gets inoculated. And then you take that out and put it into a Compost-Vid brewer and brew up more, and you have the microbes that are already existing on your farm, and it's very, very neat. So bokashi, I love it. Locally different, make our own DIY systems, and I'm willing, and I would love to chat and talk with anybody who wants to take those next steps further and figure out how we can do that here locally too. Real quickly, recap, build compost, but also don't buy a compost bin or a compost tumbler. No matter how much Lowe's tells you you need that, you don't. Do it slow or do it hot. If you can rig up your own forced air static pile system, that would be really cool. PVC pipe with perforations drilled into it, hooked up to an air compressor, or maybe a little fan on a bicycle wheel, and you just bike it all day, every day, whatever. Figuring out how to make that would be pretty fun too, and I've seen some stuff on that smaller scale at home as well. Really, all we're doing in all these, in the many different forms, vermicomposting is a really neat thing. You can do this inside your house, under your sink. You have worm bins. You can buy fancy ones. You can build your own. Noah knows a lot about worm bins these days because he's been practicing and learning, and went to some expert stuff it's best to use the worms that really like to do that and not the worms out of your yard that are going to try to run away.
That's what my first ones did.
They ran away, yeah.
Escaped out of the
Like,
bin.
get me out of here, I want to go back into the soil. But the good red wigglers, they like it. And all you're doing is you've got shredded newspaper and kitchen scraps and worms.
We use rabbit poop as well.
Rabbit poop's good in there too. Now let me tell you about rabbit poop. Every animal manure out there, you need to compost and age. Except rabbit poop and llama and alpacas. Their poo can come right out of the butt and go right into the garden without any time or processing, and it's good stuff. Right away, it's not going to burn.
Is it okay to, I read somewhere where they recommend use that he likes it. Can you use it, deer poop even in your compost? Somebody
Yeah, but how are you collecting deer poop?
Are you kidding me? We have deer all over the place up in Canada. So I could just swoop it
In Little Canada or real Canada?
Thousand Island. I could swoop
So really made Thousand Island dressing? Is it?
But I looked online someplace where it was like somehow, but I thought, how could it not be?
It's just deer poop. You're compost. I trust the compost process. I believe in the magic of compost a whole lot. And so we're probably getting close to time and running out of time a little bit. I have a tendency to talk. It's 11:30, that's when we're supposed to end. So I'm not running away. I can stick around for a little bit and talk and answer some more questions. But before we end, we were promised in the description and in my intro that we would talk a little bit about the philosophical side of composting. And it means a lot to me. This is not just a method of getting rid of kitchen scraps or a method of growing good gardens. But for me, the compost pile is my gym, my physical therapist, my mental health therapist, my church, and it is everything. The compost is the alpha and the omega of the garden. It's where everything goes to die. It's the interface. It is the interface of life and death. It's where everything goes to die and where all life comes from. And a few years ago, my good friend Zen Friedman gave me this image, this metaphor of composting grief. And it's a powerful thing that I use, and I encourage y'all to think about when we're doing some of this work. So when we're making compost, we get this nasty, foul-smelling stuff from our kitchen. And really all we want it to do is go away. In life, we're handed all these hard and heavy things: grief, anger, self-loathing, all these horrible stuff that we all battle with and deal with. And we want it to go away. But if you just push it away and bury it, we all know it comes back and it's usually stronger. So we want to throw it away just like we want to throw our kitchen scraps away. But there's penalties when you don't deal with stuff very well. But in composting, we take that bad, foul stuff, we run it through process to turn it into the good stuff to use for that next cycle. So while I'm doing my physical work of turning my compost pile and mixing my kitchen scraps, I'm doing my inner heart work of composting my griefs and my anger, my frustrations, and working them through processes so they don't just go away, that they become that gold for the next cycle. And we all have it. So we can work our hearts and work our brains to where we're providing that good, rich, fertile ground to grow those seeds. We need to. So thank you for your time. Get out and compost, y'all.